Hi, gorgeous, and welcome to the Confident, Energized, and Sexy Mama Show. I am Dorit Palvanov, your host, feminine energy expert, health coach for women, registered holistic nutritionist, and the creator of the groundbreaking health and mindset program for moms, Energized, designed for perimenopausal women who are done having kids and are ready to get their confidence, energy, and sexy back. Ladies, think about it. What would the world look like if, as women, we stopped being so harsh on ourselves and instead felt more energized, powerful, confident, and more connected to our bodies? What if, as women, we honored the fact that we are built and wired differently than men, and being different does not mean being inferior? That the go, go, go mentality, alongside doing more to have more without ever pausing and resting, only leads to chronic stress, anxiety, burnout, overwhelm, lack of joy, and corrodes our health, relationships, and vitality. What if, as women, wives, and mothers, we had the courage and confidence to desire more? More freedom, power, energy, joy, abundance, pleasure, fun, play, and sex, all on our own terms. Mama, you deserve to feel good. You deserve to form healthy relationships, and your body needs, craves, and deserves pleasure. This is your birthright. You're here because you believe in your feminine energy. You're here because you care about health and the environment, and you're not afraid to take action and change. You're here because you don't want to pass on a pattern of self destruction, hiding, and not speaking your truth to your daughters. You're here because you're done feeling stuck, living a mediocre life as a half woman. You're here because you are done struggling and, frankly, can no longer afford to feel like crap. Each week, I will be here for you, dropping a healthy dose of inspiration and motivation, as well as introducing you to my brilliant guests, where we will dive deep into all things womanhood, feminine power, energy, psychology, holistic and alternative health, food, nutrition, hormones, fitness, mindset, motherhood, relationships, sex, business, and much more. So, Mama, are you ready to take back control of your health? Let's do this. Hey, gorgeous. Welcome to another episode of the Confident, Energized, and Sexy Mama podcast. This is Dorit Palvanov, your host. And today, again, I'm at the library. So my voice could be sounding a little bit different. I'm really enjoying spending my work days at the library, by the way. Anyways, today's episode is an interview I've had with Jess Sherman. She's a colleague of mine and fellow mama of three. Jess is a former teacher, a registered holistic nutritionist, and a family health expert, specializing in nutrition for brain health and resilience for kids. For over 10 years, she has worked alongside naturopathic and medical doctors, family counselors and psychologists, occupational therapists, teachers, and parents to bring an understanding of the power of good nutrition, simplicity, and connection into a mainstream conversation about children's mental health, learning, and resilience. I wanted to have Jess on today's episode since this month, February of 2020, we are talking all about our journey of parenting our kids to become healthy and resilient and be good kids and to just become the best versions of themselves. Raising children in and of itself is not an easy task. And when you want to do it, quote unquote, right, and I say right with big, heavy, fat air quotes, it can be anxiety producing, gut wrenching, worry inducing, sleep, and yes, money depriving experience. It is hard. But, like Mary Poppins says, every job has an element of fun. Find the fun and snap. The job's a game. So, my intention this month is to show you that raising healthy, good, and resilient kids can and should be fulfilling and rewarding more than it is hard, uninspiring, grindy, if there is a word like that, but you get the point, and exhausting. So, you'll hear Jess talk about the importance of mom's health and listening to your gut only when it's actually clean from anxiety, fear, worry, guilt, expectations, and so on, because all you're here is panic, right? And I think this is so true, especially when you already are at the stage of manifesting physical symptoms. So, whether it is acne or weight loss or just brain fog, hair loss, hormonal imbalance, just feeling like you're all over the place, out of control, right? A panicked mom can barely support herself, let alone helping her children. And the research is clear about that. It's clear that we are huge influencers for our kids' mental, emotional, and physical health. And so, first and foremost, we have to get our own health, under control. So, first, take good care of yourself. Asking for help is part of it. Allow people to support and take care of you. As Dr. Shafali says, raising kids is so much about raising ourselves and so little about actually raising them. And Jess mentioned this on the episode as well. Kids need so very little to grow, to become the best version of who they need to be. They need food, they need love, they need connection, shelter, access to the outdoors. They need some quiet time in the present moment, along, other things. Who they need to become has nothing to do with you or what you think they should be or do. It is not your job to make your child become who you weren't brave enough to become. Ouch, I know that stings. Stay in your own lane and help your child to do the same. Parenting is personal growth on steroids, and so much of this relationship conflict begins with our most primal need, which is our need for food. And when we become parents, feeding our children becomes an extension of that. So I believe that feeding is parenting, and I want you to know the best strategies to feed your child with love and good sense. I want you to know the exact foods that your child needs so that he and she or she can truly thrive. I want you to have the access to the most amazing meal planning hacks to help you provide good food for your child with ease and the least resistance for you. So I would love for you to check out my most recent course. It's called From Picky Eater to Healthy Eater, and it is an interview sessions that I've had with amazing feeding experts. So how does this program work? I'm going to tell you briefly, and then we're going to go into my interview with Jess. So I've approached world leading experts who specialize in feeding children and asked them questions on your behalf. I've done this so that you don't have to go see a million experts and visit different practitioners who will help you to, quote unquote, fix your child. Your child is not broken and they do not need fixing. All you need to do is change your perspective, learn some practical tools, and then implement them with your child. This interview series is designed to find the root cause of your child's struggle with food and provide you with the tools necessary to help him or her. I've interviewed world leading experts on feeding children, people who I've been following for years. Among them are a nutritionist, occupational therapist, feeding expert, feeding therapist, pediatrician, a division of responsibility expert from the Eileen Satter Institute, an emotional intelligence intelligence expert, a life coach, a meal plan provider, and someone who specializes in teaching kids to help you cook. My number one goal with this program, with this interview series, is to help you create a solid database of resources, experts, books, programs, and tools you can turn to help you feed your child with love and good sense. So, if you want to check out the page, please head on over to healthbeginswithmom.com/courses /picky eating course. And if this is too much for you to remember, just head on over to the show notes and you will have the link right there for you. All right, before we head into today's interview, I'm just going to briefly mention the highlights from my conversation with Jess. So you will hear Jess talking about her journey from going from being a teacher to becoming a nutritionist. You will hear Jess's definition of resiliency, and I love the simplicity of it. You will hear her talk about stress and children and how our kids are exposed to basically 3 different kinds of stress. Also, you will hear Jess's perspective on the psychoeducational analysis done at school for kids who struggle with behavior and or learning. You will also hear me share an example of one of my daughter's learning styles and our experience with the psychoed assessment. How can we set our kids to withstand stress better? We talk about the brain-gut connection and how to notice signs of dysbiosis in the gut. We'll also talk about helping parents to support kids who are struggling, how to support kids who are kinesthetic learners. Jess mentioned briefly about retained primitive reflexes as a sign of brain imbalance. And the meat of the episode was the 4 pillars of resilient health, which I absolutely loved. We talk about the picky eating epidemic and how to support it. We talk about the importance of zinc as a nutrient for kids who struggle with focus and behavior. She also mentioned the fact that our kids are reflectors and are great at responding to life. And then we as parents, our job is really to learn how to understand and how to decipher their behavior. And of course, you'll hear Jess talk about her, about what makes her feel confident, energized, and sexy as a woman, wife, and mother through our fun, rapid fire questions. So, this is a fun, informative, interesting conversation. I hope you would absolutely dig it. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Jess Sherman. Enjoy. Hey, Jess, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great topic.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. We've connected previously. We are colleagues. I started my career actually also as a pediatric nutritionist and slowly veered more into supporting moms. And I'm excited to have you today because the topic of resiliency, whether it is physical resiliency, mental, emotional, even spiritually, it comes up a lot in my practice and even in my day-to-day observing of my kids, myself, and just the world around me. And I wanted to have you here today because I know you have a strong you talk a lot about the science behind resiliency, and also you talk a lot about the kind of foods that we can eat in order to support ourselves and our brains. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Awesome. Me too.
So I wanted to start, I always like to start with the story. So if you can give us a little background of how you got into this work, because if I'm not mistaken, you come from, you have a teaching background, right? So can you take us a little bit backwards and explain how this whole process evolved for you and how did you end up doing the work that you do now with families?
Yeah. Okay. So it's going back, I don't know, maybe 20 years now. I've always been interested in self-development, right? Like, how do we become who we are? How do we end up thinking the way we do, and how do we really develop into our best selves. And I started doing this work actually in outdoor education, where I was working in outdoor education kind of facilities and taking people, mostly kids, on outdoor adventures and into the woods and into different experiences where they could sort of see a new side of themselves. And then that eventually took me into the classroom. So, I went to teachers college and kind of made it a bit more formal, and ended up teaching in the classroom. And that's when I noticed this sort of tension between, what we want from education, or what I think parents want from education, which is to, help their kids develop and learn and grow and, develop into their best selves. But then we had this, school structure, and it wasn't a super healthy environment to be putting kids in. So there was just, I just felt like everything was really compartmentalized, and the outcome was kids who were not as healthy as they could be. And when I was teaching, I just noticed this real striking, I guess, I don't know, reality, which is that more kids than not were struggling. And they were either struggling with some kind of physical health issue, like acne or allergy or pain or something like that, or they were struggling with something mental, emotional, learning. And, it was the odd kid who didn't have some kind of thing going on. So that's when I sort of took a step back from teaching and started to try to figure out what we needed to do to allow kids to become more healthy. And so that's when I went back to school, because I didn't, it's interesting when I look back on it that when I noticed so many kids were struggling, I didn't decide to go into special education. I didn't want to learn more about teaching tools or ways of helping kids learn better. I went back to school to study holistic health, because I had this hunch that there was more to the story. There was like there was a bigger picture. Because we could tell kids, like, do it again, or try it this way, or try it that way, or we'd rearrange the classroom, or we take kids outside, or we take them into experiences, or we were doing all kinds of wonderful things on the educational side, and still there were a lot of kids that were struggling. So, and so that's when I learned this whole other world of the biology behind learning, behavior, mental wellness, how we think, how we feel. That there's a biological piece there that was being missed.
Oh, it's so true. And I'll be totally honest with you. I haven't yet shared this on the podcast, but here I am sharing. This is very much timely for me personally right now, because one of my daughters, we've done a psychoeducational assessment, which I'm actually curious to know what your perspective on that. And I see her struggling, like real struggle. And so I'm still not quite sure. And maybe I don't really know the tools, and maybe I don't know really how to distinguish between like a true struggle that is something that she was born with, because that's what they explained to us. This is how her brain was basically made, versus is it something that we are missing nutritionally. So I really want to get there with you. But before we do, can you define, I'm just curious to know your definition of resiliency, just so that we are kind of like leveled here.
I think of resilience as basically how we respond to stress. So the more resilient you are, the more you rebound back to a relatively stable spot when you're exposed to stress. And that stress could be something social, it could be something environmental, it could be something, there's all kinds of sources of stress. But that's how I would define it. Does that make sense?
Totally. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce back from stress. So it's basically our ability to bounce a challenge, a struggle, something that is a little off. So like, because stress is such a big word, I believe. And I think as parents, I mean, as adults, I think stress is something we all know what that is. But when it comes to kids, can you talk a little bit about what is perceived as stress for children?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question because there's a big part missing, I think, from that conversation as well. So when I explore this with so let me just back up a second. Like when I walk parents through kind of exploring this, there's two parts to it. One is understanding stressors and reducing them as much as we can because our kids are under a ridiculous amount of stress right now. And then the other part is boosting stress tolerance. And that's where the nutrition comes in because all of our stress response mechanisms are driven by nutrients. So what you're asking is really important, which is what are the stressors? How do we identify them so that we can remove them from our kids' lives or reduce them, mitigate them, at least be aware of them, right?
Yes.
So on that side, I think about it. I don't know if this happened to you when you became a mom, but when I became a mom, like I needed a framework to think about
Yes.
things, or
Mhm.
everything just went in one ear and out the other. So I started becoming a little bit obsessed over frameworks. So this is the framework that I use to understand stress. I think of it in three categories. There's social stress, which is anything to do with relationships. There's environmental stress, which is anything to do with, what we put on and around our bodies, basically. And then there's biological stress, which is, I think, what you were getting at with your daughter is like the wiring of our bodies. There's either the wiring of our bodies or there's what has happened to our bodies post wiring, if that makes sense, because our wiring is very malleable, right?
Yes.
So that's all the nutritional deficiencies, the gut stuff, the blood sugar swings, like all of this biological stuff going on inside our bodies. And I think for the most part, when I see what's going on with kids, when you have a child who struggles in school, for example, and your story is, maybe we could just talk a little bit about it if you're comfortable with that. But I suspect what happens what happened, which is what usually happens, is the teachers see a child struggle and then they get in touch and they try a couple different things to see if it helps teaching wise. And usually that has to do with like repetition or giving them more time to do stuff or something like that. If their teaching stuff doesn't work, if their teaching techniques and tools don't work, then they go to the psychoed analysis, right? So the psychologist comes in, which is somebody who deals with the brain and, psychological stuff, and they try to identify the problem, right?
Yeah.
And usually what comes out of that is sort of social and environmental stress, or just this is the way your child is. Adapt, right? You're given workaround solutions, right? You're given like, okay, you get more time on an exam, or you get to use the computer, or you get, some kind of accommodation to work around what is considered just the way your child is. And that helps to a certain degree, like you said at the start, sort of, what my thoughts on psychoed. It helps to kind of help your child understand themselves. Which for some kids can just be completely life-changing. Like it can be like a huge weight off their shoulders because they're like, oh, okay, now I know how to be successful. But there's a portion of kids for whom it just doesn't go far enough, right? Because it never gets to the biological stress of like, well, are the building blocks there for the brain to function the way we want it to function? Are the building blocks there for the hormones and their neurotransmitters? And is there anything in the body that's interfering with the child's ability to sit and learn and focus? Because there's a lot of those things, which the psychoed analysis will never pick up on. So, if you, for example, like if you've got a kid who's full of yeast and clostridia in their gut, they are not going to be able to sit and focus no matter how many body breaks they get and how many, what are they called? The educational assistants they have. no matter how much extra time they have on a test, like there are bugs in their gut that are creating a situation for them that they can't control. So does that make sense?
Yes. And, I think it would be the best for me and maybe for the listeners also, and I think for you too, if I share my experience. I mean, I'm going to try not to get too much into detail. I'm not going to, say who it is. It's one of my kids. But here's what happened. And I'll be totally transparent with you. So my daughter has been having, so since she entered school system, so since JK, SK, grade 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to grade 5, there was one and only complaint I've been hearing across the board from all the teachers. And that is it's like she loses focus. So it's like she's there and then something happens and all of a sudden, like, they lose her. That was the only one. And because it was so consistent, across all those years, I personally was very much against the psychoeducational assessment, because I think what happens, my sister, both of my sisters had it when we were growing up. And what I've seen in their situation was that it created a set of limiting beliefs about themselves. And so instead of that being helpful, which that's how the school presented it to us, right? So we're going to be able to understand how they're learning and we're going to be able to give them tools. But what I am seeing, and it's been 5 months, we've done it at the beginning of the year. It's been 5 months since she's getting help. And I am seeing, actually, I mean, I want to try not to be too dramatic, but I am seeing it being a disaster. Let me put it this way. I do not see it as being helpful. I think it's either the teachers don't really have the right tools. It's either they don't really understand how to decipher the psychoeducational assessment. And all of this mushmash created a situation where she believes about herself that she just doesn't need to try. She just doesn't. And for me right now as a parent, it's really challenging to, because now I have to kind of like fight against her mindset and then what they believe in school and then how I support her at home. It's like, I feel like it became even worse.
Yeah. It's really interesting story because it's one that I've heard before. There's two sides of this labeling situation, right? Which is on the one hand, it can be really positive and say like, you know what, this tells us what your superpowers are. It doesn't tell us what you can't do, right? It tells us what your super, like a kid with ADHD, for example, like they are amazing at they're very often very quick and very amazing at understanding like the whole picture of something, and they can really focus on something when they're really interested in it. But on the flip side, you're never going to get them to pay attention to something that doesn't interest them. But on the flip side of the psychoed analysis, you're absolutely right. I see this a lot. Is it can really establish a set of limiting beliefs, and to the I don't know if it's the defense of the teacher or just the reality of the teacher. Having been through teachers college, like you don't learn anything about that in teachers college. At least you didn't when I went through. We didn't learn anything about how the brain works. We didn't really learn anything about how kids learn, to be honest. Like we learned a little bit about, kinesthetic learners and, the different types of learners, but mostly teachers are trained to deliver curriculum, right? And like I say, I went through teachers college about, 15 years ago. So maybe things have changed a little bit, but from my experience, like that was stuff we learned on the fly through PD days, the odd, the odd thing. And if you went into special education, then there's that stuff. Or the psychologist would know that stuff, but it's become really compartmentalized. And since there are so many kids struggling now, there's a big gap in the education from my perspective of what the actual on the floor teacher can do or knows how to do. Right.
Yeah.
And this is, if there are teachers listening, I mean, no disrespect at all.
Yeah.
Like, I think teaching is an
It's
amazing,
hard.
it's the hardest job. I know. And it is like, teachers are amazing.
Yes.
But their hands are a little tied. They're limited in what they can
Yeah.
do.
And
Right.
also they have so many kids in the classroom. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
And
okay. So yes, it is a complex situation. It is, I mean, I can see it, and I hope that it is not too late at this point for me to intervene. And even intervention, which is why I wanted to have you here, I personally do feel like I need guidance. How do I intervene in a way that, so for example, I'll be totally honest, today I flipped. So it's been about 2 or 3 days maybe that she hasn't done her homework. And I am not pro homework. I believe kids needs to come home and just be home and just chill. I don't think it's right for kids. It's my personal belief. I don't think it's right for kids to, come home and continue doing things from school. I just don't, I don't think that this is right. I think kids need to come home and just relax and to allow their brain to unwind. But the school we are sending our kids to, that's just part of their policy. That's how they do things. And so what happened was that she came home the past 3 days, and every day she didn't do her homework. And that is, I'm telling you, like, since the psychoeducational assessment, that's what happened. So from a highly motivated child, highly responsible child, she became kind of like, oh, well, I know it's, they'll forgive me. I know I'll be supported. It's like, and she never shared this with me, but I suspect that that's the dialogue that happens in her head. And maybe it's not. Maybe I am assuming, and maybe, and I did kind of lose it this morning, and she was very upset. But so I guess for me, I also need, tools how to support her without making her feel even worse about herself. Because she did say, Mommy, now, well, great, because now I feel guilty about myself. So
it's so interesting. It's so interesting. We never know where this stuff is going to land for kids, like we can have the best of intentions of wanting to just learn more. I mean, essentially a psychoed assessment is really just, the intention is just to learn more about how a child learns. Yeah. Right. And we just don't know how that's going to land. And that's where resilience comes, right?
Yes.
Because it's the same thing with anything. One thing that I've become really interested in is protecting our kids from trauma, because we live in, like, there's so much trauma right now. It's like, you can't get through childhood without a little bit of trauma. And sometimes it's big things, like abuse and death and these huge major traumas. But sometimes it's, teasing on the school bus, or it's, someone telling you that something about that's going to create this limiting belief in yourself. So I think a really resilient child, it lands differently. It also depends, of course, on how it's delivered. Right. So I think there's a whole conversation that needs to happen in education and amongst educators about how to deliver this to a child, knowing that it could land in a whole bunch of different ways. Right. But then, from a parent, what can parents do? That's where this biology piece is so fascinating. How can we set our kids up to withstand stress a little bit stronger? Because, as I said before, those stress tolerance systems in our bodies are driven by nutrition. So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty fascinating. It's not talked about very often at all. Like, I never, when I was teaching, ever had a kid come back from a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist or a psychologist or somebody who a brain person with a therapeutic prescription for something to do with other than the brain itself. You know what I mean? Like something to do with the gut or something to do with nutrition or something to do with amino acids, like never. So that's changing a little bit because people now understand that the body is a full ecosystem. You can't improve the brain without improving the body, and you can't improve the body without improving the brain. Like they work together. They're the same thing. So that's changing a little bit, but not in the education system still. It's not there yet.
So can we talk about the brain-gut connection? It's fascinating to me. And also, and if you can also mention, maybe if it's so much, it would be so helpful to me as a mom to, if you can give me some signs to look out for. I mean, yes, the focus is one thing, but maybe there are some physical signs that I should be looking out for to know whether she has dysbiosis that could be under all of this. So for example, here's what I'm referring to. My daughter she doesn't have eczema, but she has a very dry skin in the wintertime. So would that be something that I should be looking out for? Is how does dysbiosis in the gut, how would it look like on the body? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it's a huge question because the gut is the great connector. I mean, once we discovered, there's a thing, like you talk to anyone who's like studied Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or any of these old traditional therapies, and they've known this for centuries. But conventional, science and I guess medicine is just coming around to the idea that the body is a series of interconnected systems, right? And part of why we can no longer deal with the body in compartments, right? The way conventional medicine is set up that way, right? You have a gut problem, you go to the gastroenterologist. You got a brain problem, you go to the psychiatrist. Right? Mm-hmm. It's set up to be compartmentalized. But now, now we know differently that actually the psychiatrist and the gastroenterologist should really talk to each other.
Yeah.
And we know that because of what we've discovered in the gut, because the gut connects everything. Every system in the body touches the gut in some way, right? So because of that, symptoms of gut dysbiosis can appear anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
It's the great
connector. It can be different. It can be different.
It can be different for different people. So a skin issue could be the gut, but it could also be the gut in different ways, right? So the dry skin, for example, parasites can cause that. Candida can cause that. Some kind of infection in the gut can cause that. But it could also be, that she's not absorbing fatty acids well, because fatty acids are, the skin requires fatty acids to be supple and healthy. And a number of nutrients as well go to the skin to just create the skin. And that's also digestive. So it's not necessarily, a pathogen in the gut that's causing it, but it could be a mild digestive imbalance, right? And just on that fat thing, right? If you're not digesting fats very well, then they're being pooed out, basically, right? Probably. Or sometimes it actually will cause constipation because it kind of clogs things up. So that could look like a skin problem. It also could look like a neurological problem because most of the brain is fat. The brain requires a lot of fatty acids for structure, but also for function. So could that be contributing to the spaciness? Yeah, it could. There's so many factors, right? There's so many factors, but to answer your question of like, what does gut stuff look like? It could be anything because the gut touches every body system.
And as far as the research, what does the research say about the brain-gut connection?
Well, it's telling us that the gut and the brain are constantly talking to each other, and that there's basically a bi-directional highway going back and forth. the big news over the last sort of, I guess, 10 years, maybe 15 years, is that factors going on in the gut can affect the brain, right? So like candida in the gut can cause a kid to be hyper or spacey, or can cause neurological effects, that sort of thing. But then even sort of more recent, sort of maybe in the last maybe 5 years, there's been more conversation about how it can go the other way as well, which is the brain affecting the gut. So head trauma, for example, can cause digestive difficulties, that sort of thing, right? We've known that on a different level for a long time, because we've known that, yoga, for example, or calming the mind, or, these sorts of things, which actually are sometimes making it into classrooms, which is kind of cool. Mindfulness, meditation will reduce anxiety around the body. But this new information about sort of brain structure and brain trauma affecting the gut is a little bit newer. So yeah, that's what we know. We know that, to influence the brain, you got to look at the gut and the brain, and to influence the gut, you need to also look at the brain and the gut. They're pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's assume that you are working with a family. So let's say it's me. How does it look like, the process, when you are guiding parents? Is it just the educational piece, or do you also help them with strategies, and do you try different things nutritionally? How does it look like when you work with clients?
Well, we live in if there's one thing I know about parents from being one and from working with them, is that they are hungry for information. We are hungry for information, right? When something's going on with your kid, it's like you hit the books and you hit the internet and you just like dig, because of course we want to help them, right? Mm-hmm. So typically what I see with parents is they're stuck in information overload. They've got too much information already. Usually, sometimes they need a little bit more information, but usually it's not more information that they need. Usually it's the application part. It's like, what do you do with all this information? And especially because you're dealing with another person, right? You're trying to get someone else healthier and not yourself. So that's a different story from changing your own health. So I focus a lot on the application. I keep the information in tiny bite-sized pieces of exactly what you need to know. But then the bulk of what we do is implement. So what I started finding, I worked in a clinical setting for a number of years, and I just started finding myself saying the same things over and over, and the same questions were coming up. Like, parents with kids who struggle with behavior, learning, mental health issues have the same questions and the same struggles, and they need to do the same things for the most part. Yeah, there's some, bio-individual stuff, and there's some tweaking of different supplements and maybe different testing and stuff. But so now I stopped working in the clinic, and I work in groups. I bring parents together in a group, so that, and we do it all online. So we have constant connection with each other. So they don't think that they're so alone. They don't feel so alone anymore. I don't know if this was your experience, but like, your child gets a diagnosis or whatever, and then you're just like lonely.
Yeah. Now what do I do?
What do I do? Yeah.
And the way they presented it to me, it's like, your child has a disability. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, first there is my own crap that I have to, sort through. Like, how do I live with the fact that I have birthed a disabled child? And then
that's the first thing. We are so good at self-blame, right?
Yes. And then how do I present it to her in a way that is not going to screw her up, and she's not going to end up in therapy for years and years later?
You know what? If there's one tip that I can throw out there for you, but also for other parents who are going through this, because I know, so many parents, we've got to find their superpower, right? We've got to find what they're really good at and focus on that. Not to not to belittle the things that they need to work on, right? Because if there are some areas of struggle that they need to get better at, then, we need to support them getting better at those things. But for the sake of their self-esteem, we need to find their superpower and help them understand that there's different sides to all of us, right? There's different sides to all of us. We all have great strengths. We all have things that are not as strong. And that's what makes people, right?
Yeah. So I can share, for example, my daughter's superpower, and that was, they did present it to us through the psychoeducational assessment, that her superpower, she's a kinesthetic learner. And her one and only struggle is really with math. She's struggling understanding concepts of math because they are many times are presented as being like out of context. And so that is an example for us that we know her superpower. She's great with her hands. She's she's kinesthetic. She likes to, like, she needs the learning to be applied. And so I don't know, I guess I just don't know how. And I see the teachers are also struggling.
Yeah, I'd say, from teaching, like, that's the hardest kind of learner to teach because it requires time and it requires space and it requires a great deal of creativity. Right. And so
do you have some ideas how we can support her better given her superpower?
That's a big question. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know her, but usually, I mean, I have a kinesthetic learner as well. And he, he makes it through his day and he just lets loose afterwards. And he's really into sports and he's really into moving and getting outside. And so we make sure that there's time for that after school. I mean, that's kind of like where we've landed with it. So I don't know. I really can't really answer that.
Yeah. But you know what? I am grateful for these answers because, first of all, this is an example of listening to your gut. I should have just not went with, first of all, it's crazy expensive. It's $3,000 that we paid, which is heartbreaking, knowing that it's, not doing much. And second, I think now what I feel that she really needs is more movement. And so when you said sports and moving, I'm like, oh my gosh, I should have listened to my inner voice a long time ago. And
so here's the other side of that. Sometimes with kinesthetic learners, they just can't stop moving, right? Like they just want to move all the time. And sometimes there can be a biological piece to that as well, right? Which is worth exploring. Like, why can't they turn on that parasympathetic nervous system, right? And this is where the whole body approach comes in, right? To say, if a child, and this might not be the case for your daughter, but if a child can't stop moving and is in perpetual motion all the time, there's a few things to look at in terms of nervous system health. One thing that often will help is looking at retained reflexes. I don't know if we don't need to get into it, but people can look it up, what, retained primitive reflexes are. But that can, if a child hasn't integrated these reflexes into their bodies, it will have certain effects on how their brain wants to work.
That's interesting.
So that's something people can look up. But then nutritionally,
let's talk about food. What can we do in terms of food to support them?
Yeah. But it's a really good example, just before we get there, a really good example of saying, like, the difference between saying, okay, this is how your child is. They are this thing. They are, ADHD, or they are a kinesthetic learner, or they are whatever. There's that. So the diagnosis being an end point versus the diagnosis being a beginning point of, like, okay, this is what they are right now. Let's look at what contributes to that, because the label tells you nothing about what's causing it, right? The label is just a collection of symptoms or observed behaviors, right?
And it increases my anxiety.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But if you can look at it from that different perspective, being like, okay, this gives us a little bit more information. Let's now go dig a bit deeper and see what's contributing to that situation, right? Because ultimately our goal is we want our kid to be their best self, right? So let's just talk about what you asked, which was the nutritional factors.
Yes.
When I was working clinically and I, like I say, started saying the same things over and over, and then I was looking at the research and in the research finding the same things over and over. Again, I created another framework because I need frameworks. And what I do with my clients is I walk them through this framework, and I call it the 4 pillars of resilient health. And we find our answers by exploring these 4 pillars. So do you want me to just quickly run through them?
Yeah, please.
So the first one is nutrients, right? Nourishment. Is your child getting the building blocks that they need through their diet or through supplements if they're needed? The second is irritation. So is there some kind of food sensitivity or some kind of allergy, or is there excess stress? This is where all the social and environmental stress comes in. Are they sleeping enough? Like there's irritation, what's filling up their glass so that they can't function their best. The third is related to the second, but it's blood sugar, because which causes all kinds of problems. We've all felt it,
Yeah.
The hanger, and so blood sugar stability. Are they eating in a way that keeps their blood sugar stable throughout the day? And this is really important for the kids who are explosive, having meltdowns, really important for the kids who can't shut down as well,
yes.
who are spinning because they are revving up all the time.
I have a child like that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for everybody. So blood sugar stability is the third. And then the last is digestion, tip to tail. Like what is going on in the digestion? Are they extracting all their nutrition from their food, digesting well? Is there some kind of pathogen in the gut contributing, and how can we optimize digestion? So those are the 4 areas that we walk through, and different parents find their answers in different pillars, but by the end of having explored all of them, they have a really good sense of the biological factors that are contributing to their child's behavior and health issues.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, but can you, first of all, I love this framework, and I already have a little hunch of where my daughter could be off.
Yeah.
But I know the listeners are thinking about the food, like the nourishment pillar. Can you elaborate on that so that at least people leave with the sense of, okay, I know these are the absolute musts for our children's health.
Yeah. And I'm glad you picked up on that one, because usually people are like, tell me about the allergies, right? Because often when a child's, if your conversation comes to food, usually it's like, take out the additives, take out the sugar, take out the gluten, take out the dairy, take out all the stuff, right? And that is so stressful.
It is, yeah.
So it's not where I start. It's hardly ever where I start. I start with nourishment, because we've got for so many reasons. I mean, we could spend our whole time talking about nourishment, but there are so many reasons why I flipped the conversation so that parents start with this perspective of nourishment. So, what do you want to talk about So
my own experience, my daughter, she's a pretty good eater. I mean, I really cannot complain. She's a great eater. But I have a sense that she is, she's growing, and there are just some foods that she's starting to avoid. So I want parents to hear the importance of healthy fat. I want parents to hear the importance, and we've already had some experts who talked about, chelating toxins out of the body. So I want them to know about antioxidants, foods for focus, for that kind of stuff, like specific foods. If you can name a few that we absolutely need to have in our kitchen, in our pantry, and constantly exposing our kids to?
Oh, that's a huge, huge question. Well, the first thing I would say is, for anybody listening, this is a massive topic that we never learn as parents, right? So like the whole first 3 weeks of my program is like a crash course in nutrition, what you need to learn as a parent about nutrition. Because like, honestly, when do we learn this stuff?
Yeah.
We're learning it when we're already in crisis, usually, right? So have some compassion for yourself. If you don't know what a healthy fat is, or what fat should I have in my whatever, like all this stuff, it's big. So where to start with that? I'd say my first thought is for parents. Usually parents are like, what supplement do I need? Like, does my child need a multivitamin, or does my child need a fat, like a supplement? And I would say, the research is showing us that nutrients work synergistically together, right? So there are 30 essential nutrients that the brain needs to function, and we need all of them. So supplements are not going to, you need a healthy foundational diet before you layer on potentially some targeted supplements. That's the first thing I would say. So if you're not already, have your child eating a variety of whole, home cooked, prepared foods, that's where you start. And if your child if you have a really picky eater, that's a whole other conversation, because like nutrients, like whole food is a non-negotiable. Like we've got to get that into our kids. And if they're being really picky with food, we got to figure out why. And we have to work through that so that they start eating. So that's a whole other conversation. But, in terms of specific foods, usually I have parents start by, and there's a handout on my website of the first 4 food swaps that I think parents should make. And fats is one of them. So making sure that you have a variety of fats in the home, because you asked specifically about that. One pitfall that I see parents falling into is they use, avocado oil for everything, or coconut oil for everything, right? So if you find yourself in that, know that your child needs a variety of fatty. They need the monounsaturates, the polyunsaturates, and the saturates. They need all the fatty acids. So we need to switch it up. So for example, just because you asked about fat, I have in my kitchen olive oil and avocado oil for the monounsaturated, coconut oil and butter if you tolerate dairy, and ghee for the saturated. And then we supplement with some flax and fish for the polyunsaturates. And I also have red palm oil and lard from a local farm, which is it's a combination of monounsaturates and saturates. So saturated, sorry, I'm using the wrong words, but saturated and monounsaturated. So that's sort of my first tip is they need all of them, and keep it simple, and just, keep switching it up, and make sure that you're not falling into that sort of one size fits all kind of thing, because they need everything. Does that?
Yeah. Can you talk, I know people are thinking, some strategies, maybe even 1 or 2, some strategies that you usually recommend to parents of picky eaters, how to get picky eaters to eat? I know it's a big topic. I know
it's a big topic, and maybe in your show notes I can link you to a blog post where
yes,
I
please.
it a little bit more.
Yeah.
So again, frameworks. There's social reasons, there's sensory reasons, there's hormonal reasons, there's digestive reasons. There's a reason. There's always a reason for behaviors, and we need to figure that out. And so sometimes it is a social thing. So they are really pushing back because it's the only time they have full control over their body. They just shut their mouth. And in that case, just pushing it is not, pushing it, forcing a child to eat never works. Even though I know we want to. We've got to figure out what's causing it. So I think the best thing to do would be for me to to post that because it's a really
Yes,
big
for sure. I will. I made a note there, and you guys, I'm going to have that link because I know your website is packed with so much information.
Yeah, but I think the real take home message with picky eating, because it is epidemic for sure, is that there are some biological drivers of it that when you find them, like for example, a child who has a lot of yeast in their gut is going to crave carbs, right? A child who does not digest protein very well is going to avoid meat, right? Because it doesn't make them feel good. It makes them feel nauseous. A child who is zinc deficient is probably not digesting well and probably doesn't really want to eat much at all, and is probably also tasting things in a really weird way because zinc is involved in all of that, right? So we need to become a little bit of a detective. We need to approach our kids with a ton of compassion and a ridiculous amount of patience, and try to just sort of pull apart the story and figure out why you're seeing what you're seeing. One thing we know about kids is they are amazing at reflecting, right? That's what they do. And we see that from day one, right? They are mirrors, they are reflectors. They
It's
respond.
a feedback system. Yeah, they do
Exactly.
respond.
Yeah, they respond. And so we just need to figure out what they're responding to.
I love it. I'm so happy you said that because I feel like my takeaway from this conversation is number one, as parents, we have to listen to our gut. That's my takeaway. And number two, it's not about more. Sometimes it's really about less. So really keeping it simple. I love the frameworks. Even from like these 4 pillars, I already kind of intuitively know where we need to, maybe give her some support. And when you said zinc, oh my gosh, that's been on my kind of radar since she was born. Because I was zinc deficient when I was pregnant with her. And so it's incredible how, it's those little tweaks that, make the biggest of difference. And I know, we can talk about this on and on and on. So before we wrap this up, I have a set of rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay. Can I add one thing before you do that?
Yes.
Because I know you're all about mom health. And when you said, you've got to listen to your gut, I would add to that you can't listen to your gut if your own gut is not healthy, right? Like you got to take care of yourself. You've got to
assuming your gut is healthy.
But not, and I don't mean your actual gut. I mean your body, right? Like if you are full of anxiety and you're not sleeping and you're not eating and your blood sugar is crashing and your hormones are all over the place, then you don't know what you're listening to, right? Because all you're going to hear is panic. Your body's going to panic, right?
Yes.
So go through some of the strategies that you do, like like look at Dorit's like website and all that stuff, and because you're right, you do have to listen to your mommy gut, but you also need to do that from a place of calm and health.
Exactly.
So get yourself healthy, then listen to your gut, and then you'll find your next step.
Yes. Oh, thank you. This is really important. Totally. And I didn't even mention that because I'm like assuming that this is, yes, of course. Totally. Thank you. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. What is your definition of feminine power?
Confidence is the word that came to mind.
Yes. Okay. How do you, what are some of your non-negotiables? How do you take care of yourself?
Allowing myself a cup of coffee. Getting to bed before 10. Taking deep breaths when I need them. That's all I can think of.
Good. What advice does your now mom self would have given to your pre-mom self?
Don't panic. You got this.
Yes.
And can I add to that? I know.
Yes, sure.
You and your child are connected.
Yes.
There is a strong connection there. Sometimes it feels wonky and I have learned so much from attachment parenting that makes me just go, oh, okay, I got this. So look up attachment parenting.
Yeah, I'm going to add that to the show notes also. Is there a book you want to recommend?
Simplicity Parenting was the first book I ever read on parenting, which made me go, oh, okay.
Yes, it's a good one.
Loved it.
Yeah. All right. What makes you feel confident?
Watching my kids play.
Aww.
That's the first thing that came.
Yeah, because I mean, I think I would be the same. Like, oh, I did this. I created this.
Yeah, and they know what they're doing. Like,
yeah,
it just makes me feel like, okay, things are okay.
Things are good. Yeah,
they know how to play.
that's good. Yeah, and independently, right? For me, that's everything. Okay, what makes you feel energized?
Helping people, for sure. Yeah.
What makes you feel sexy?
Silk.
Ooh. I love that.
I don't have a lot of it, but it sure makes
okay, my last question. In one sentence, what is your vision for your life? What are you creating? What is your life's purpose?
Oh gosh. I am working towards a new perspective in healthcare, a new paradigm in healthcare, which is like so crazy big. But I want, as soon as kids start to struggle with anything, mental or physical or emotional or learning, that the first thing that parents are coached on is making sure the building blocks are there and getting their kids what they need. Because there's this gap now that kids are not getting their basic needs met. And it's not the fault of the parents. It's just the way our culture is developing. And what they need is pretty simple. What they need is strong connection. They need space. They need good food. And that's pretty much it, right? Clean air, clean water. With that strong connection and that space piece are just, they're getting even the, food. We have so much food that isn't food. It's gotten confusing about how to get back to basis. So that, the process of raising resilience that I take parents through is really about paring down and getting back to the basics.
Love that. Jess, you are amazing. You are a wealth of information and knowledge. I love reading your emails. I love your blog posts. Thank you so much for the work that you do. Before I let you go, can you please tell people how can they connect with you online, how they can work with you? And for sure, I'm going to add all the links that you mentioned in the show notes. So now,
thank you so much. Well, my website is jesssherman.com. Mm-hmm. So that's 3 S's, Jess Sherman.
Yeah.
We have a free Facebook community where parents who kind of want strategies for raising healthy, resilient kids can come and talk to each other. And that's at raisingresiliencecommunity.com. Mm-hmm. My book is called Raising Resilience, and it's at raisingresilience.ca. And my, what was the last one? The Resilience Roadmap is the program that I walk parents through. Awesome. And that's at jesssherman.com/resilience roadmap.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. And I cannot wait to connect again. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye, Jess.
Bye-bye.
Wait, before you go, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you did, I want to know about it. So snap a picture of you listening to this episode and share it on Instagram or Facebook. On Instagram, you can tag me at Dorit Palvanov Coaching. So Dorit is spelled as Dorit and Palvanov spelled as Palvanov Coaching. So it's all one word. Or you can use the hashtag Confident, Energized, and Sexy Mama Podcast. You see, my personal goal beyond having amazing conversations with guests or hosting solo episodes is to increase the visibility for this platform and these messages to be shared and heard by women who need it the most. And there's no way that I can do this on my own. So I'm asking you, the incredible community of confident, energized, and sexy mamas to help me with this goal. So whether you're coming to me through iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show from, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. This would mean the world to me, and it's so helpful for other mothers who are looking for this information. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.